The sky's the limit for Jessica Ravel.
What I was looking for was someone like me who was working towards an amazing future.
She shoots for the moon and finds a superstar.
He was charming. He was attentive.
But when his dark side brings her back to Earth,
he was really a master of manipulation. I didn't know what was real and what wasn't.
She wishes he'd never set foot on the planet.
I was in a state of terror and fear that I didn't ever think I was going to get away from him.
It was sort of like they were getting prepped for surgery. That's when he would remove them from the bar and take them back to his apartment.
My instincts were telling me when I woke up that morning that everything was wrong.
It was dozens and dozens of people who had the same experience.
Someone was going to get hurt. It was just one big exercise in sexual violence. I started college as a musical theater major. And I went on to be a history major, and I focused on medieval and Renaissance British history, which was not the most practical thing that I could have majored in. At a certain point, I needed to get more practical about what I was going to be doing in my life. So I decided I was going to go to law school.
24-year-old Jessica Ravel grew up in New Jersey and is in her second year of law school at Rutgers University when the unthinkable happens nearby.
Okay, it sounds like we have some breaking news to tell you about out of New York. There's a
fire burning in the World Trade Center right now. We're just hearing about that right now.
Afterwards, I wanted to do something to help. Eventually, it kind of came to me that the skills of being a lawyer translated into being able to work in the intelligence community or service in the Navy. It was a place that I really could contribute and do something towards helping after 9/11.
With a vision for her future now crystallizing, Jessica sinks herself into her studies, leaving little time for leisure.
Everything was just going really well, but going into the winter of that year, I realized that the thing that was missing in my life was a guy. What I was looking for was someone like me who was working towards an amazing future. I complained to one of my girlfriends that there just weren't any good men in the world anymore, and she laughed and said, "Oh man, do I have the guy for you." He's in the Navy, he is a doctor, he's really just intelligent and funny, and I think you would get along well with him. So I was all like, yeah, bring that on. Let's see where that could go.
It's early December when Jessica heads down to the Hard Rock Cafe in Philadelphia for a blind date with Dr. Jeffrey Marsalis.
I got there first, and when he walked in, I was honestly kind of underwhelmed. He walked in a black t-shirt and black jeans, and he was really pale. And he had this kind of weird flat top haircut. Not too flattering. I mean, not unattractive, but not attractive either. It definitely wasn't love at first sight. Jeff told me that he grew up on the West Coast. His mother ran a school. His father was a pilot. He talked a lot about how he was a flight surgeon in the Navy and his work as an emergency room doctor. There was something I found attractive about him. He was funny, but he was also arrogant. Looking back with hindsight, I think that I made excuses for that. So after the date, Jeff walked me to the train station, and there was no goodnight kiss, which was fine with me at the time. You know, I wasn't sure even that I liked him.
And Jessica isn't sure whether Jeffrey likes her either, until she gets a call from him the following week asking for a second date.
I said, yeah, why not? I didn't have a bad time with him, so why not go out with him again? When we went out for the second time, we actually decided that we were going to get Chinese food and watch a movie at my house. So he came to my door, and before he even walked through, he said, "Hey, chunky butt, how are you doing?" And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, what woman wants to be called chunky butt? So I actually said to him, "Hey, could you please not call me that, because it's just not cool." I was a beauty queen. Like, I spent time in a swimsuit being judged on my appearance. Being called chunky butt, like, at that time, it was just so not true.
It's an awkward beginning to their evening, but the tension eases up.
We set up the movie and started eating, opened a bottle of wine, and, just talked. We were having a pretty good time, and we got through most of the bottle of wine, and suddenly, I have no idea what happened. I do remember being in my kitchen and him kissing me. And that was the last thing that I remembered until the next morning. All of a sudden, he's in my bed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I do? I totally didn't mean to do that. That wasn't on my agenda for the evening. There should have been no reason for me to black out after, let's say, half a bottle of wine. Even if I had drunk the entire bottle of wine, blacking out just isn't something that happens to me. So kind of waking up not remembering anything was strange.
That blackout period, that time she can't account for, to wake up and not know why or how somebody is still there, that unknown is very scary.
Jessica doubts herself to the point where she wonders if Jeffrey will have a bad opinion of her for sleeping with him so quickly.
But when he woke up, he told me what a great time he had last night. So I just said to myself, you know what, like, I might as well at this point go out with him again, since we've already gone there. And that morning we went for breakfast. And at some point it turned into a relationship that at first was really nice. He was charming. He was attentive. We talked a lot about having a future together and what that may look like. I remember we went to dinner one night in an Italian restaurant. And this restaurant had kind of an alcove where there was a table for two. No one had ever done something like that for me before. It was very romantic. So at some point, the relationship, it just worked. We were happy. I was happy with him. I was happy with where things were going. He was a good guy. And I was looking forward, into what a future might look like with him.
The relationship becomes serious, but the demands of Jeffrey's job means their time together is often disrupted.
He would frequently call me and say, all right, sorry, I got to go off and save lives. And then he would come home and tell me that, he had saved a baby or a pregnant woman or, something that would really just pull at the heartstrings. That made me feel good that I was dating this guy who really helped people.
It's been barely 2 months since they met, and Jeff goes radio silent for periods of time. Jessica becomes suspicious until one night when he tells her he has an important confession to make.
He said that he was a non-official cover agent for the CIA. He said that he had gotten special permission to tell me because I was someone who was special in his life, who he felt like he was going to have a future with, and that I needed to know and understand who he was and all of him. It's not that he wasn't an ER doctor and he wasn't a flight surgeon. He was, but they were both a cover for what he did for the CIA.
It's a little over a year since 9/11, and fighting terror is on everyone's mind.
That was a major milestone in our relationship. It was clear that he felt like I was someone he wanted to be a part of his life. In fairness, like that was flattering to me that he would get special permission to share something so important, with me. There were periods of time when he would go away, that I wouldn't know where he was or where he was going. And during that time, he always said that it was because he was off fighting terrorists.
It will be years before Jessica discovers the unfathomable truth. about what Jeff is really doing while undercover.
Marsalis was audacious. He was bold. He felt that he was never going to get caught.
It was just a very Jekyll and Hyde existence.
I took a sip of the drink that was mine, and I don't remember anything until I woke up the next morning. I was in his bed. I had no clothes on. He was next to me. I was very confused.
Jessica Ravel is getting deeper into a relationship with Dr. Jeffrey Marsalis, hoping that one day they'd get married and become a power couple.
He was helping people, and that was really attractive to me. We talked a lot about a future together and what that would look like with me as the lawyer, him as the doctor.
In January 2002, Jessica and Jeff go to Bermuda for their first weekend getaway.
When we first landed, it was freezing, and there wasn't anyone around. We got to the hotel. I think that it was under construction because it was an off-season. It was not the most romantic environment for a trip.
Jeff suggests they rent a scooter. They ride out to a remote beach, but the journey is far from idyllic.
I started getting scared. Because it was dark and we were the only people there, I told him that I wanted to go back, and he told me no, and he just kept driving. He was swerving the scooter in a way that felt dangerous to me. He was laughing in a way that just felt incredibly unhinged, and I remember just crying and telling him I wanted to go back, and he was like, "What, do you think I'm gonna kill you?" "I'm afraid. I want to go back. You're not wanting to take me back, and that's just scary."
This could be a test on Jeffrey's behalf of scaring her, but then showing her that nothing's going to happen and he is her protector.
Finally, Jeff climbs on the scooter and they ride back to the hotel.
By the time we got back to the hotel, I was just a total mess. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to be there. And it was one of those situations in which he started telling me, "You're going to have to learn to have my sort of sense of humor."
Jeff's strange mood continues, and he seems intent on baiting Jessica.
He proceeded to tell me about a time that he and his friend, who was also in the CIA, saw two guys coming out of the club, and they thought, let's pick a fight. So they picked a fight with the guys.
And this is when Jeff drops a bombshell.
He ended up killing one of them, and his friend put the other one in the hospital. He told me that when the police came, he basically showed them his CIA card, and he got right out of it. That should have been a moment that was just a huge red flag. And I know it sounds probably ridiculous, but he had a way of normalizing things that were just ridiculous and horrible. This is an example of something that I've done with one of my friends. And if you can't appreciate that, then we're not going to be able to have a future together. He had this training, and sometimes instinct just took him somewhere that, normal people don't go. I think that I rationalized that it was part of what he did as part of the CIA.
On another trip, Jeff's vanity is on full display.
We went on this Disney cruise, and then we spent a couple of days in Florida. Jeff was obsessed with taking pictures of him in different settings and different poses and different states of dress. He got really dramatic with the way that he posed. He would, kind of put his head back and smile. And I just found it really strange that he was so obsessed with having these pictures of himself. The one thing that he did express interest in was becoming an astronaut. We then go to Cape Canaveral, where he decides that he needs a picture of himself in an astronaut costume. I remember asking him, well, why do you need to do that if you're going to go to astronaut training? He was like, well, it's just a fun thing to do. After we were done with the photo session, he was very excited about the picture. He actually gave it to me as a gift.
On their first Valentine's Day in 2002, Jeff tells Jessica he wants to show her where he works.
Jeff said he had something really special planned for us. And we went from his apartment to the hospital. He seemed to have access to everywhere. He then proceeded to take me to the cadaver lab. He opened drawers with dead people, showed me different organs, and suddenly he ripped off the guy's arm and then chased me around the cadaver lab with it while he laughed maniacally. I was terrified, and he told me it wasn't a big deal. He asked me why I thought it was such a big deal.
When they return to his apartment, Jessica is furious.
I remember grabbing my bag and just telling him I was leaving, and he blocked the door. He wouldn't allow me to leave. It was just one of the first times I saw behind the mask.
Despite this deeply disturbing incident, Jessica and Jeff continue to see each other. And in the summer of 2003, Jessica graduates from Rutgers Law School.
I took time and did some research into where I might want to be. I ultimately ended up enlisting in the Navy as an intelligence specialist.
Over the next year, Jessica launches her new career as Jeff continues to serve the Navy and CIA in his undercover capacity.
He would be going off on what he called missions. He's playing me recordings of what he says are him interrogating terrorists in Afghanistan, and all I hear is screaming. He played those things for me pretty regularly. I was 24, 25, and at that age, I didn't have a lot of experience with the world. It seemed like, oh my gosh, I knew what the CIA was from movies and TV, and what he was telling me made sense.
Jessica thinks the pressure of Jeff's work or some unknown stressor is making him increasingly controlling.
He started isolating me from my friends, getting me to a point where I needed to rely on him for comfort, for friendship, because I just didn't have anyone else. Either I stopped talking to them, or my life was just getting too crazy with him and they stopped talking to me. I came to think that this was just my life and something that I needed to deal with, because if I didn't, people were going to get hurt. He talked about killing people, so there was definitely a part of me that was quite sure he was capable of doing that to me or people I love.
Jessica becomes scared in her relationship.
I just started looking for coping mechanisms. I would literally go to the gym and do an aerobics class and then run 10 miles a night. So I had an excuse to not be near him. I trained for a marathon so that I wouldn't be able to see him on weekends because I was just afraid.
After more than 2 years of dating, Jeff pops the question in April 2004.
You would think getting engaged is supposed to be this happy, exciting thing. But by the time that, he brought it up, I was already in that state of terror and fear that I didn't ever think I was going to get away from him. So I said, okay. And that was it.
But unbeknownst to Jessica, Jeff is leading a sinister double life.
I totally lost my 20s to this horrible, horrible person. And they're not something that I can ever get back.
After their engagement, Dr. Jeffrey Marsalis asks fiancée Jessica Rovell to accompany him on a trip out west.
His dad was his idol, so it was just a really big deal that I was going out to Park City, Utah to meet his dad. We went skiing, we went shopping. From what I recall, we did a lot of nice things on that trip. Seeing the normalcy of the family really made me question, where did he come from? Because they were just so kind and welcoming.
But it remains a stark contrast to Jeff's disturbing and frenetic energy.
He busts open the drawer and just starts screaming at me. He's got a shotgun and he's pointing it at me and he's just screaming, "I'm gonna kill you." When he was done screaming, he took a pause and he looked at me and said, "Just kidding," and turned around and pranced out of the bathroom. I think at that point, I was just so broken down. I let it go as one of those things that I needed to deal with in my life.
Back in Philadelphia, Jeff's abusive behavior continues.
I remember being on the phone with him, and I didn't care if he killed me. I didn't care if I lived. Like, I just couldn't deal with him anymore. And something just, clicked in my head. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And I hung up on him, and I immediately called 911 and said I needed help. I needed help. And as they were sending police over, I called my mom and I told her everything that was happening. And, it was kind of one of those, like, why didn't you tell us moments?
The police arrive and escort Jessica safely downtown to file a temporary restraining order.
It could have gone the wrong way any number of times. Handling it the way I did actually may have saved my life.
Soon, Jessica will learn that she is not alone, because Jeff's undercover work for the Navy and CIA has been a cover for something completely different.
It was March of 2004 when I began communicating with Jeffrey Marsalis. It was a time in my life where I was interested in getting married and having children.
Joanne Bataro Cooper is single with a successful career in marketing when she decides to give online dating a try.
Jeffrey Marsalis' profile looked like he was a good catch. He had pictures of him in his medical scrubs with an astronaut's uniform. He had a lot of other pictures. Jeffrey said that he wanted to meet me out for a date, and I said yes. I lived in New Jersey, so he planned for me to come into Philly.
They go to a popular Irish bar in Philadelphia, the Tur Na Nog, where he describes his thriving career as an astronaut.
I was excited because he actually looked like his profile. As we were chatting and sat down at the bar, he started describing his residency program and the NASA program, and I was interested. He was interesting. He lived in a high-rise apartment building in the city that was also just a few blocks from where we were. So we went down to his apartment. He asked if I wanted a drink. I said no to an alcoholic drink. So I just wanted something non-alcoholic, whether it be water or soda. I sat down on the couch. We started to talk a little bit. He did kiss me. I then took a sip of the drink that was mine. And I don't remember anything until I woke up the next morning. I was in his bed. I had no clothes on. He was next to me. My head hurt. Every part of me hurt. I was violently ill. I knew I had sex with him. There was no question. But I didn't know why, because I had no intentions of staying over in his apartment, of having sex with him. I blacked out for probably about 8 hours. There's nothing in between my taking the sip of the drink and then waking up the next morning. I chalked it up to maybe not having enough to eat on Friday.
When Marsalis wakes up, his reaction seems to indicate nothing is amiss.
He started chatting with me like everything was normal, like what we did was normal, and I didn't say anything to him that I didn't remember anything. I just kept it all to myself. So I had assumed that I, wanted it, and I can't really explain it. I wish I could, but I can't explain it to myself. I just figured I would just forget about it. I was just gonna put it away and move on.
Over a year after Joanne dated Jeff, Jessica gets an unexpected call from the manager of his apartment building.
She called me and said, hey, I think you need to call the Philadelphia SBU. And I was like, oh, okay. Why? What happened? And she said, just call them.
Jessica immediately reaches out.
I remember them asking me questions, and some of them were about him dating other people, and I had no idea.
The special agents tell Jessica that Jeff is accused of raping at least 2 women while she has been engaged to him.
At first, I don't know if I was in denial. I understood what my experience was, but as they were asking me questions about what sounded like the experiences of other women, it just, gosh, I don't even know how to explain it. There came a point when I was talking with the detectives that kind of a light bulb went off, and it all kind of came together. The last couple years of my life were basically one big date rape. I came to understand that it wasn't just me, and that was just so scary.
I have to almost laugh at that. Let's get over the profile. And eventually we're going to see me as the person who I am inside. The caring, the loving, the nurturing, the easygoing, the great guy.
In March 2005, Philadelphia's Special Victims Unit launches an investigation into Jeffrey Marsalis.
The first victim that came in said she had met him on a dating website. They went out on a date. She said they had a couple drinks, went back to his apartment. She woke up with him on top of her. And then wake up the next morning, he kind of sweet talks her into hey, we were both drinking, we had a good time, we should go out again. And she did. But after he stopped talking to her, it was really bothering her. And she came in and made a report.
By this time, it's too late to conduct a rape kit or drug test on the victim. But police obtain a search warrant for Jeff's apartment.
The first time he's not home, so we go to the manager of the apartment complex.
When the building manager reads the search warrant, she is visibly distressed.
You could see the blood just go like this, just go right off her face. And we looked at her, she says, he did the same thing to me. We went to search his apartment. Screensaver had CIA on it. He had a bulletproof vest there. He had a doctor's coat with his name on it.
They also find what appear to be classified CIA documents, all of which are later determined to be forgeries.
Mr. Marsalis was very good and very committed to pretending to be a doctor. And he convinced other doctors, other patients, other people in the hospital that he was Dr. Marsalis. He came from tremendous privilege. He was given the opportunity to go to a number of great schools, but by the time we encountered him, he was a nursing school dropout who went around lying about who he was and victimizing women. What we found on his computer was a list that he kept. He called it the Yearly Calendar of Women, and that contained the first names of a number of women he had had sexual intercourse with.
They found a list of about 50 women.
We were shocked to learn that it wasn't 2 people who were raped by Marsalis or 3 or 4, but it was many, many women who were all victimized in the same way.
One of the names on the list is Joanne Bottaro Cooper.
Someone who worked for the assistant district attorney started to ask me if I knew Jeffrey Marsalis. She explained to me why they were calling me and what he was being investigated for. And at that moment, I had a flood of emotions. Everything that didn't make sense to me back in March of '04 came at me hard. I hung up the phone and I ran into the bathroom and I had an emotional breakdown.
Jeffrey Marsalis is arrested in April 2005, but makes bail and flees to his mother's condo in Utah. Jessica, Joanne, and a group of other victims work with police to prepare for trial.
We came up with a plan between the Philadelphia police detectives and FBI agents. Some of the victims were local, some were in the surrounding counties, some were in other states. And we started to slowly interview all of those individuals.
It becomes evident that none of the witnesses reported the rapes to police in a timely enough manner to conduct drug tests or a rape kit.
The investigation never identified the actual drug that he used. I think the strength of this case was the volume of victims who did not know one another, but yet their stories all were very similar.
The prosecutor chooses the 3 cases he will present at the trial.
I was a witness. They called me the glue that brought everything together. Because he was doing all of this while we were together, I was a baseline, the patient 0. He started with me and then just continued with these other women. We're all professional, successful women, just confident. And his mother is a strong woman, an educated woman, a confident woman, a successful woman. And it always struck me as bizarre that he chose his victims almost in the image of his mother.
The victims were very brave for being willing to share their story with the jury. Marsalis's defense attorney told the jury that the victims were lying and that this was all some kind of misunderstanding and that Marsalis was the real victim. Marsalis looked very smug and confident.
Their strategy was, he's a liar, he's not a doctor, he's not the things that he said he was, but he's not a rapist. These were women who were looking for, Prince Charming, and he's not that, so they're upset and they conspired together because they had seen him again and then they had a consensual relationship that presented a challenge to get a successful prosecution.
In a controversial ABC interview with Marsalis, he reacts to their accusations of him lying about his profession.
The truth is simple. We had a great time. Had consensual sex numerous times with one another. If I'm such a god-awful person, why do you keep on hanging out with me for?
He's extremely excited by it, but he's excited by it because he is gaining control over somebody who he shouldn't be able to get control over. They shouldn't be easy targets. And so therefore, by going after them, he has gained control, and that level of control thrills him, excites him, and just pushes him to do it again and again and again.
At the trial, the defense lawyers adopt a familiar tactic, victim blaming.
What were you wearing? Why did you sleep with him? Why did you sleep with him again? Why did you go out with him again? So it becomes more a focus on the victim's morality, if you will, than it does about the individual, the accused's culpability in the situation. In Pennsylvania at the time, there was no mechanism for there to be psychological testimony as to why rape victims act the way they do in the wake of a sexual assault. And that was problematic because with the jury, the actions that a person takes afterwards are not always what you would expect.
While the jury takes 5 days to deliberate, the victims hold their collective breath.
The result came in, and it was an acquittal.
Let me make something very, very clear to you. I have never drugged anybody. I have never raped anybody. I've never forced myself on anybody, ever.
It was difficult to hear the verdict of not guilty with respect to those 3 women. What Marsalis didn't expect, what caused the smug look on his face to disappear, was when he was arrested in the courtroom for what was going to be a second trial with 7 different women presenting their story to a jury.
After his acquittal and rearrest, Victims continue to come forward, and Jeff becomes the focus of a new investigation. But hidden from the proceedings, just 2 weeks prior to the Philadelphia trial, Jeff is living in Sun Valley, Idaho.
His family had some affiliation with this resort, and he got a job there as a security guard.
It's there in October 2005 that Marsalis and a female coworker share a few drinks after work. When she's suddenly unable to walk, he puts her in a taxi and takes her back to his place to repeat a familiar scenario. But this time, Jeff's tried and true technique backfires.
She was a lesbian, and she knew that she was not going to be sleeping with a man. So she knew that she woke up and it wasn't right.
She was not confused about what happened to her. And so because she went to the police right away, the detectives were able to get a rape kit, to get physical evidence proving what had happened. They were able to talk to the bartender who talked about the drinks that were served. They were able to find witnesses who had seen her being dragged out of a taxi cab by Marsalis. This was exactly the kind of evidence that we did not have in Pennsylvania because the victim came forward right away.
Now, with another trial pending in Idaho, Philadelphia law enforcement take Jeffrey Marsalis to trial for the second time in May 2007. The case focuses on 7 women, bringing a total of 66 charges, including rape.
One of the women lived in his building, and a woman who had met Marsalis on a date after coming into Philadelphia from New Jersey.
That woman is Joanne Butaro Cooper.
I gave my testimony, and I got to stare him straight in the face and point at him and accuse him of the crimes he committed against me. That felt very empowering. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. He saw me there, and his face dropped. It felt really good to know that someone could scare him a little bit still.
After deliberating a week, the jury finds Marsalis guilty on 2 counts of sexual assault and impersonating a government official, but without physical evidence, acquits him of all other charges.
They found him guilty of sexually assaulting 2 women.
I was surprised that the jury did not see the truth and that he wasn't convicted on all counts.
He's a felon now, and he will always have to register as a sex offender.
With Jeff finally behind bars, Jessica begins the difficult task of rebuilding her life.
With every moment that you are moving forward and putting it further in your rear view, I look at my own life, and there are some tough years. It's not something that you ever forget. Certainly, it's always there. It's possible to get to a point that it's not the sole influence in your life.
Despite not being found guilty of rape, Marsalis is given a new moniker in the press, the Match.com rapist. It's not until April 2009 that the Idaho case goes to trial.
The jury heard that Marsalis denied having had any kind of intercourse with the victim, and yet a rape kit that was performed showed that he was a liar.
I felt like she was the strongest. She did what all of us hadn't done.
As Jeff enters the court for sentencing, he notices Jessica sitting in the gallery.
He thought he was being smug and he was getting to me. But at the end of the day, my being able to look back at him and, really just signal to him what a dirtbag he is was satisfying and an opportunity to just take my power back, and I did.
After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Marsalis guilty of rape.
When it comes to sentencing, the judge is able to take the dozens of cases from Pennsylvania into account.
The outcome of the third trial was the most satisfying of all of them.
I will sentence you to a term of life imprisonment in the Idaho State Penitentiary.
Jeffrey Marsalis is declared a sexually violent predator.
It was the moment in which I knew that it wasn't wrong. I knew that it was not real. And I'm glad I went to Idaho, because I don't know whether I'd have gotten that closure otherwise.
I questioned myself instead of him, and I will never do that again. And I will make sure that I can speak out and tell women that you should always believe yourself first.
Joanne starts a rape crisis counseling organization and eventually, through a mutual friend, reconnects with an old boyfriend from college.
I've been married for 3.5 years. I'm extremely happy in my job. I work for a nonprofit, and I just continue to do things that make me happy.
Without the bravery of all the survivors in this case, he'd still be out there doing it.
Jeffrey Marsalis is, in fact, one of the worst serial rapists in Pennsylvania's history.
After the Marsalis case, rape trials in Pennsylvania will never be the same.
When victim after victim shared the same story, and Marsalis was still acquitted of rape, the Pennsylvania legislature responded by changing the law, which allowed expert testimony to come into rape cases so that jurors could better understand the psychology and behavior of rape victims.
I want to let others know that this is not going to define you for the rest of your lives. This is a moment in time, and it sucks. Like, it really, truly sucks, but you get past it.
Jessica goes on to become an intelligence officer in the Navy and spends 20 years working for the FBI.
I'm an investigator at Microsoft now. There are so many good things that have gone on in my life. I'm married, I have 2 amazing silly dogs, and I've got relationships that are strong with my family, my friends. I talk with universities, with businesses, with government agencies. I want people to know you're not alone. You're not alone. And no matter what you think has been taken away from you, you have the power to grab it back.
It begins with a sound that should not exist at 6:43 on a quiet California morning in the spring of 1987. The slow, unanswered ringing of a telephone inside a house where someone should have picked up. Outside, the neighborhood is already awake. Lawns are being watered. Car doors slam. Somewhere, a radio murmurs the news. But inside that house, time has stalled, frozen around a silence that feels wrong, heavy, deliberate, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. By the time police arrive, the phrase cold case does not yet exist in their vocabulary, but the seed is already there, waiting, dormant, ready to grow for decades. The house sits on a clean street lined with jacaranda trees, the kind of place people describe as safe without thinking twice. California in the late 80s still believes in that illusion. Doors are often unlocked. Neighbors wave, but rarely ask questions. Inside lives a family that blends perfectly into the background. No scandals, no police calls, no whispered rumors. The victim is young, known, ordinary in a way that should have protected them. Instead, it makes what comes next unbearable. There are no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no struggle loud enough for anyone to hear. Whatever happened here did not crash in violently. It slipped in quietly, like it belonged. The first officers on scene move slowly, methodically, aware that something about this place is off. Furniture is undisturbed. Valuables remain where they should be. The air smells faintly of cleaning products and something else, something metallic, something that makes one of the officers pause before stepping further inside. In one room, the victim lies still. Too still. Death has already settled in, calm and final. There is shock, but not chaos. No obvious weapon. No note. No explanation waiting neatly to be discovered. Just a body, a quiet room, and a question that forms instantly and refuses to leave. Who could do this, and why here? Word spreads quickly. By noon, the street is crowded with patrol cars and unmarked sedans. Curtains twitch. Neighbors cluster at the edges of their driveways, voices low, eyes darting. This is not supposed to happen here. This kind of thing happens somewhere else, to someone else. The victim's name moves from mouth to mouth, each time sounding less real. Reporters arrive early, sensing a story before details exist. Cameras point at the house, hungry and patient. And somewhere in the crowd, someone is watching very closely, careful not to watch too closely. Detectives begin where they always do, reconstructing the last known hours. Who saw the victim last?
Who spoke to them?
What they were planning to do that day. The answers are painfully ordinary. Dinner plans. A routine visit. A familiar face stopping by. Nothing that raises alarms. Nothing that explains why this life ended here. Friends describe the victim as trusting, kind, the sort of person who never imagined danger lurking behind a smile. Family members echo the same words through tears, struggling to understand how something so brutal could grow out of something so normal. As the hours stretch into days, the case begins to attract a new label from the media: mysterious. Investigators canvass the neighborhood, knocking on doors, collecting fragments of memory. Someone heard a car. Someone saw a figure they can't quite describe. Someone noticed nothing at all. Tips pour in, most of them useless, some of them strange. One caller insists the house felt different that week, as if something bad was coming. Another swears they saw a familiar car parked out front at an odd hour, but can't remember the license plate. The pieces refuse to fit together. Inside the investigation room, the evidence board grows crowded, but not clearer. Photos of the scene. Maps of the neighborhood. Timelines scribbled and rewritten. The lack of forced entry becomes an obsession. Whoever did this was not a stranger kicking down a door in the night. They were let in, or they already belonged there. That realization sends a chill through the room because it shrinks the suspect pool in a way that feels personal, invasive. Suddenly, the danger is not abstract. It has a face, or many faces, all of them familiar. Detectives start looking inward, toward the victim's circle. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, family acquaintances, people who attended birthdays, shared meals, borrowed tools, laughed in this very house. Interviews begin politely, cautiously, but the tone shifts as patterns emerge. Inconsistencies. Alibis that wobble under scrutiny. Stories that change just enough to raise eyebrows but not enough to accuse. Everyone seems shocked. Everyone seems cooperative. Everyone insists they loved the victim. And yet, someone is lying. The community feels it before it understands it. Trust erodes quietly. Neighbors who once chatted freely now watch each other from behind doors. Parents keep children inside a little longer. Conversations trail off when certain names are mentioned. There is a sense that the threat did not come from outside, but from within, and that realization is more terrifying than any unknown intruder. The case dominates local news, headlines growing darker with each passing day. Mystery deepens. No arrests yet. Police seek new leads. The word cold has not yet appeared, but the temperature is dropping. Weeks pass. Then months. The initial flood of tips slows to a trickle. Evidence that once seemed promising goes nowhere. Forensic tests return inconclusive or useless, limited by the technology of the time. A partial print that can't be matched. Fibers that could belong to anyone. The case begins to stall, and frustration sets in. Detectives argue late into the night, replaying interviews, re-examining photos, asking the same questions again and again, hoping repetition will reveal what logic has not. And then, quietly, a name begins to surface. Not officially. Not in press releases. In side conversations. In notes scribbled in the margins of reports. A trusted family friend. Someone close enough to be invisible. Someone who knew the routines, the habits, the blind spots. Someone who would not have raised suspicion standing at the door. The idea is explosive, dangerous, and yet impossible to ignore. When investigators look at this person's timeline, things don't line up neatly. When they revisit earlier statements, cracks appear. Small ones. Enough to notice. Not enough to prove. The media catches the scent almost immediately. Anonymous sources whisper. Headlines sharpen. Person of interest identified. Family friend questioned. The community reacts with disbelief, then denial, then a creeping dread. This is someone they know. Someone they've trusted. Someone who attended holidays, who smiled in photographs, who stood in this house without causing fear. The possibility that such a person could be involved feels like a betrayal too large to process. But suspicion is not evidence, and evidence remains stubbornly out of reach. The suspect denies everything, calm, cooperative, almost wounded by the suggestion. There is no confession, no eyewitness willing to go on record, no physical proof strong enough to survive a courtroom. Prosecutors hesitate. Police push back. Time continues its quiet work, eroding urgency, softening edges. The case does not end. It simply stops moving. By the time the year turns, the story has changed. What was once a breaking news sensation is now a recurring reminder, resurfacing on anniversaries, mentioned in hushed tones. The phrase cold case finally enters the conversation, heavy with implication. The house stands unchanged, but everything around it is different. Lives move on, but they move around this absence, this unanswered question that refuses to disappear. And somewhere beneath layers of files and fading memories, the truth waits. Not resolved, not confessed, just suspended, like that unanswered phone call on a spring morning in 1987, still ringing, still echoing, daring someone to finally pick up. The problem with time is not that it heals, but that it rearranges the crime scene in ways no investigator can control, because while evidence sits in boxes and memories fade into something softer and less precise, the people connected to the case continue to live, to speak, to make mistakes, and sometimes to reveal more than they ever intended. In the months following the killing, detectives learn this the hard way, as the investigation slips from the sharp urgency of the first days into a slower, more suffocating phase, where every move feels reactive and every lead feels like it might be the last before the trail goes completely cold. Re-interviews begin. Not because new evidence has appeared, but because old statements no longer feel solid. What was once accepted as fact now sounds rehearsed. The trusted family friend is brought back in, again and again, always polite, always calm, answering questions with the confidence of someone who knows how to sound helpful without giving anything away. Each session ends the same way, with handshakes, controlled smiles, and a growing frustration on the other side of the table. There is something there. Everyone can feel it, but feeling is not proof. Detectives start digging into the past, not just the victims, but the suspects. Old friendships, old disputes, financial pressures that were never mentioned out loud, a failed business deal years earlier, a quiet argument that neighbors recall only vaguely, as if remembering it now feels disloyal. Small details surface, none of them criminal on their own, but together they form a shadow that didn't exist before. This was not just a family friend. This was someone who knew where the lines were and exactly how far they could be pushed without being seen. The victim's routine becomes a timeline carved into paper. Who they called, who they trusted, who they confided in. Phone records are combed through manually, line by line, a slow and imperfect process in an era before digital convenience. One number appears more often than expected. Familiar, safe, belonging to someone no one ever thought to question. The realization hits like a quiet punch to the chest. Trust, once given, is hard to take back, even after death. Meanwhile, the community is unraveling in subtle ways. The initial shock has settled into something darker. Suspicion doesn't scream. It whispers. People avoid eye contact. Invitations stop coming. Children are warned carefully about who they can talk to. The case has taught everyone the same lesson, that danger does not always look dangerous. And that lesson lingers, heavy and uncomfortable, shaping daily life in ways no one admits out loud. Inside the police department, pressure mounts. Supervisors want results. The media wants updates. The family wants answers. Detectives feel the weight of all three, pressing down every time they open the case file. They revisit the crime scene in their minds, again and again, walking through it step by step, imagining different scenarios, different choices, different outcomes. What if someone else had arrived earlier? What if a neighbor had looked out the window? What if the victim had hesitated, just for a second longer? New technology is limited, but hope is not entirely gone. Evidence is sent out again for testing, re-examined with slightly improved methods. Results come back slowly, cautiously. Some samples are too degraded. Others are inconclusive. One item, once dismissed as irrelevant, suddenly raises questions. It doesn't point cleanly to anyone, but it doesn't clear anyone either. It becomes another loose thread, tempting and dangerous, because pulling it too hard could unravel the entire case. The suspect's name begins to appear more frequently in internal documents. Still unofficial. Still careful. Detectives argue over strategy. Push harder and risk losing cooperation, or pull back and wait for a mistake. The suspect, for their part, seems to sense the shift. Conversations grow shorter. Answers become sharper, more controlled. The warmth that once defined the relationship between families has cooled into something formal, transactional. Whatever innocence once existed, real or performed, is slipping. Years pass. The file thickens. Dust settles. New cases demand attention. Younger detectives glance at the old photographs with curiosity, but no emotional connection. To them, this is history. To the original investigators, it is unfinished business that refuses to stay buried. The phrase "cold case" now appears in official memos, typed without ceremony, as if naming it makes it easier to accept. But acceptance is the one thing that never comes. Every anniversary brings renewed interest. Articles resurface. Old quotes are recycled. The family gives statements that sound practiced, exhausted, but still hopeful. The suspect lives openly, visibly unchanged, blending back into the community with remarkable ease. Some people defend them fiercely. Others avoid them completely. The divide is quiet but absolute. No one wants to be wrong. No one wants to believe the worst. And yet, the doubt remains, persistent and corrosive. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice enters the story. A former acquaintance. Someone who had stayed silent for years, convinced what they knew was unimportant. Time has changed that perspective. They come forward with a memory that refuses to stay quiet any longer. A conversation. A strange remark made after the crime, dismissed at the time as shock or poor judgment. Now it sounds different. Now it sounds like something else entirely. Detectives listen carefully, recording every word. It's not enough. Not yet. But it adds weight to a theory that has been floating just beneath the surface for years. The suspect is called in again. The room feels colder this time. Questions are more direct. Silence stretches longer. There is a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when composure slips. A hesitation. A look away. It's gone as quickly as it appears, but it's there. Everyone in the room sees it. Still, the law demands more. The case remains officially unsolved. Files are archived, then reopened, then archived again. Each cycle feels heavier than the last. Detectives retire. Witnesses age. Some die, taking whatever they knew with them. The suspect grows older too, moving through life uncharged, untouched by the legal consequences that hover just out of reach. And yet, the story refuses to end. It lingers in conversations, in newspaper clippings tucked into drawers, in the uneasy way people still reference the year 1987 as if it's not quite over. The cold case is not just a file. It's a presence. A reminder that sometimes the truth is close enough to see, close enough to name, but never close enough to hold. As night falls on another anniversary, the house stands silent once more. No police lights. No cameras. Just a structure holding memories that no one can erase. Somewhere, someone knows exactly what happened inside those walls. And until that knowledge is spoken aloud, the case remains cracked, but not broken, waiting, patient, and painfully alive. Time does not announce itself when it changes a case. It simply arrives one day wearing a different face, and by the time anyone notices, the damage is already done. In the early 90s, California feels older, harder, less forgiving, and the investigation reflects that shift, moving away from hope and toward endurance, sustained not by momentum, but by refusal to forget. The cold case unit inherits the file like a burden passed down, thick with paperwork, contradictions, and a single name that keeps resurfacing no matter how often it is crossed out and rewritten. The new detectives read everything. Not just reports, but margins. Notes scribbled late at night. Questions never answered. They listened to the original tapes, grainy recordings of voices caught decades earlier, trying to hear what their predecessors might have missed. What strikes them is not what is said, but how it is said. Confidence where there should be hesitation. Precision where memory should falter. The trusted family friend's voice stands out, steady and unshaken by time, unchanged even as the years pile up around it. They decide to start over without starting from scratch, a delicate balance that requires humility and skepticism in equal measure. The crime scene is reconstructed using photographs, measurements, and written descriptions, the physical space recreated in a windowless room where detectives walk through imaginary doorways and trace paths that no longer exist. They notice details that once seemed insignificant. The angle of a chair. The placement of an object that feels intentional now, staged rather than random. The absence of chaos. This was not an impulsive act. This was controlled. The victim's life is revisited with fresh eyes. Not the public version, but the private one. Journals. Letters. Conversations recalled by friends who now speak more freely, less afraid of causing pain. A pattern emerges, subtle but persistent. The victim had begun to feel uneasy in the weeks before their death. Nothing dramatic. Just a sense of being watched, of boundaries shifting. They mentioned it once, casually, to someone they trusted. That trust now feels like the most dangerous element of all. The suspect's alibi, long accepted as solid enough to discourage deeper scrutiny, is examined again. It rests on people who cared about them, people who had no reason to doubt at the time. But loyalty ages poorly under pressure. One witness admits they may have been mistaken about the time. Another acknowledges they filled in gaps without realizing it, shaping memory to fit comfort rather than fact. The alibi doesn't collapse, but it bends, enough to let doubt slip through. Technology inches forward, and with it, possibility. Evidence once considered unusable is tested again, handled by technicians who treat the samples like fragile relics. Results trickle in slowly, carefully worded, cautious not to overpromise. There is nothing definitive, but there is exclusion. Names quietly crossed off lists. Paths closed forever. And each elimination leaves the same figure standing in the narrowing spotlight, unchanged, unmoved. The suspect's life, meanwhile, continues in plain view. Career shifts. New relationships. Public normalcy maintained with an almost defiant consistency. To some, this is proof of innocence. To others, it feels rehearsed, an act perfected over years of scrutiny. Detectives watch from a distance, limited by law, bound by procedure, waiting for something to crack. Sometimes it does. A sudden anger. A careless comment. A story told differently, depending on the audience. Each moment logged, archived, weighed. The community has learned to live with the uncertainty, but it hasn't made peace with it. The case is referenced the way people reference storms or earthquakes, events that leave scars long after the headlines fade. New residents hear about it in fragments, warnings wrapped in anecdotes. Older residents carry it like a secret they didn't choose. Everyone knows the name. Everyone knows the year. No one knows the truth. A break almost comes in the form of a letter. Anonymous. Brief. Written in uneven handwriting that suggests nerves or haste. It claims knowledge of the crime, hints at guilt without naming it outright. The writer says they've carried this weight long enough. Investigators treat it cautiously, aware of how often desperation masquerades as confession. The letter yields nothing concrete, but it reawakens interest, stirs old emotions, pulls the case back into the light. The suspect is questioned again. This time, the room feels different. Not hostile, but charged. Decades of suspicion hang between the questions and the answers. The suspect's composure holds, but just barely. There is fatigue now, irritation at the persistence of the inquiry. "You've got nothing," they say, not angrily, but with the confidence of someone who knows the limits of the law. And they're right.
For now.
The detectives leave the interview with a familiar frustration, but also a renewed certainty. This case was not meant to be easy. It was designed to endure. Whoever committed the crime understood timing, trust, and silence. They exploited all three. The lack of resolution is not accidental. It is the final act of control. And breaking that control will require patience measured not in months, but in lifetimes. As the decade closes, the file is updated once more. New notes added. Old ones reconsidered. The status remains unchanged. Unsolved. Cold case. The words feel heavier each time they are typed. Outside, the world moves forward, unaware of how close it once came to an answer or how narrowly it missed it. Late one night, a detective lingers after everyone else has gone home, staring at a photograph of the suspect taken years ago. The face looks ordinary, forgettable. That, more than anything, is what makes it terrifying. The detective turns off the light, locks the door, and carries the case home in their thoughts, knowing that somewhere, the truth is aging alongside everyone else, waiting for the one moment it can no longer hide. And so the cold case remains alive, breathing quietly beneath layers of time, its pulse faint but steady, refusing to die, refusing to be solved, daring anyone to come close enough to finally finish what was started in 1987. The case survives the 90s the way certain buildings survive earthquakes, damaged, reinforced, altered, but never erased. By the time a new millennium approaches, the file has become a kind of living artifact passed from hand to hand, its edges soft from years of use, its contents heavier with everything that never made it to court. The words California 1987 cold case no longer sound temporary. They sound permanent. And permanence in an investigation like this is its own kind of failure. A new generation of detectives enters the picture with a different relationship to time. They were young when the crime happened, or not yet born at all. To them, 1987 is not memory but history, and that distance allows for a colder, more surgical approach. They don't remember the media frenzy. They don't feel the emotional residue of the first interviews. They approach the case the way one approaches a puzzle stripped of context, asking not who feels guilty, but what still makes sense. They digitize everything. Old reports scanned, audio cleaned up, photographs enhanced just enough to sharpen edges without inventing details. Patterns begin to emerge that were harder to see on paper. Timelines overlap in ways that feel intentional. Gaps appear where assumptions once lived. The trusted family friends movements on the day of the crime are mapped again, this time minute by minute. The margin for error shrinks. The story they've told for years still works, but only just. Technology offers new temptations. DNA databases grow. Cold case breakthroughs dominate headlines elsewhere. Families wait by phones. Detectives submit evidence once more, knowing the odds but unable to ignore the possibility. Weeks turn into months. Then results arrive, carefully worded, cautiously optimistic. A partial profile. Incomplete. Not enough to name a killer. Enough to exclude several more people. The circle tightens again, and once more, the same figure remains inside it. The suspect is older now. Grayer. Slower in movement, sharper in defensiveness. When contacted, they agree to speak, outwardly cooperative, inwardly irritated. The interview room has changed since the 80s, new furniture, better recording equipment, but the tension feels familiar. Questions revisit old ground from new angles. Memory is tested. Pressure applied gently, then more firmly. The suspect answers smoothly, but there is a subtle shift, a sense that the repetition itself has become exhausting. Innocence should not require this much maintenance. Outside the station, the world has learned to live with unresolved stories. True crime becomes entertainment.
Cold cases become podcasts.
The community hears their own tragedy reframed, narrated by strangers, dissected for clues that have already been chased to exhaustion. Some welcome the attention, hoping exposure might bring new witnesses. Others resent it, feeling the case is being consumed rather than solved. Through it all, the same question lingers. How can something so close remain so unreachable? The victim's family ages under the weight of waiting. Parents grow older. Siblings build lives around an absence that never shrinks. Their memories are vivid, painful, unchanging, while everyone else's blur. They attend meetings, give statements, repeat details they know by heart. Hope becomes something quieter, less dramatic. Not expectation, but endurance. They are not waiting for closure anymore. They are waiting for truth. A potential break comes unexpectedly, not from evidence, but from circumstance. A former associate of the suspect is arrested on an unrelated charge. During questioning, a comment surfaces, casual, almost careless. A recollection of a night long ago. A tension remembered. A remark overheard that felt wrong even then. The witness hesitates, aware of the gravity of what they're suggesting. Detectives listen without interrupting, careful not to contaminate the memory with their own theories. The statement is thin, fragile, the kind that can collapse under cross-examination. But it aligns with other fragments collected over the years. It doesn't solve the case. It sharpens it. Investigators feel that familiar surge of adrenaline tempered by experience. They've been here before. They know better than to celebrate. The suspect is confronted again, this time with information they were not expecting. The reaction is controlled but revealing. A defensive laugh. A quick dismissal. Then silence. The room stretches around that silence, heavy with implication. Nothing is admitted. Nothing is proven. But something changes. The confidence that once dominated these interviews begins to fracture, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Legal realities loom large. Prosecutors review the file with clinical detachment, weighing the risk of trial against the cost of failure. Circumstantial evidence can persuade a jury, or collapse entirely. Memories are old. Witnesses inconsistent. The defense would have decades of doubt to exploit. The decision is delayed. Then delayed again. Justice, in this case, must wait for certainty that may never come. Public interest flares and fades in cycles. Each new development sparks headlines, then disappointment. Cold case nears breakthrough. No charges filed. The language grows cautious, almost apologetic. Reporters learn not to promise endings. The story becomes less about resolution and more about persistence, about the strange endurance of a question that refuses to die. As years pass, the suspect's health becomes a factor. Mortality enters the equation, unspoken but present. Investigators understand what it would mean to lose the chance entirely. They work faster, smarter, with a quiet urgency that has nothing to do with publicity and everything to do with time running out. The case is no longer just about what happened in 1987. It's about whether truth can survive long enough to be spoken. Late one evening, after another long review session, a detective notices something that had been overlooked not because it was hidden, but because it seemed too simple. A detail repeated across statements, always the same, always volunteered without prompting. It feels rehearsed, defensive. The detective marks it, circles it, and feels that old, dangerous sensation, hope. The cold case does not break. Not yet. But it shifts subtly, almost imperceptibly, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. Pressure builds. Cracks form. Somewhere, beneath years of silence and strategy, something is beginning to give. And when it does, it won't be loud. It won't be cinematic. It will be quiet, precise, and devastating, the kind of truth that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything once it finally arrives. The strange thing about a case this old is that it begins to live in two times at once, the moment it happened and every moment since, layered over each other until cause and consequence blur into a single, continuous ache. By the early 2000s, the investigation no longer advances in straight lines. It circles. It returns. It waits. Detectives learn that progress does not always look like movement forward. Sometimes it looks like standing still long enough for something else to move instead. The suspect knows this too. Years of being watched, questioned, speculated about have taught them how the system breathes, how it slows, how it eventually turns its attention elsewhere. They have learned when to be visible and when to disappear, just enough to avoid friction. Conversations with neighbors are brief, but friendly. Public appearances are measured. Nothing excessive. Nothing memorable. The kind of life that leaves no edges for suspicion to catch on. To some, it looks like resilience. To others, it looks like strategy. Inside the case file, however, the narrative is tightening. Detectives notice how often the suspect inserts themselves into the story, volunteering information no one asked for, correcting details that don't need correction. It's subtle, the kind of behavior that means nothing in isolation, but when stacked against decades of similar moments, it becomes difficult to ignore. Innocent people forget. They contradict themselves naturally. They don't usually curate their own history this carefully. A quiet review of financial records opens another door. Nothing criminal. Nothing dramatic. Just patterns that don't quite match the life the suspect describes. Periods of unexplained stress. Short-term loans. Obligations that feel heavier than they should. Investigators consider motive again, reluctantly. It's an uncomfortable exercise, assigning meaning to numbers, speculating about pressure that never turned into a police report. But motive doesn't have to be visible to exist. Sometimes it hides in pride, in fear, in the desperate need to control how one is seen. The victim's final weeks are reconstructed yet again, this time with an emphasis on emotional proximity rather than physical movement. Who spoke to them when they were uneasy? Who reassured them? Who told them they were overthinking things? A pattern emerges that feels cruel in its simplicity. The person the victim trusted most during that period is the same person who remains most entangled in the unanswered questions. Trust becomes the central weapon in the story, more powerful than any object left behind at the scene. As this perspective solidifies, investigators begin to consider the possibility that the crime was not meant to disappear forever, that it was designed to look solvable, almost, while remaining just beyond reach. No forced entry. No obvious rage. No mess. A scene that suggests familiarity and calm, lulling everyone into assumptions that would later become obstacles. It's a chilling thought, that the absence of chaos was not mercy but planning. Another witness comes forward, reluctantly, years after leaving the area. Distance has given them courage. They describe a change in the suspect after the crime, subtle but persistent. A guardedness that replaced warmth. A fixation on news coverage. An insistence on discussing details that most people avoided. At the time, it felt like shared grief. Now, it sounds like something else. The statement is recorded, cross-checked, placed carefully into the growing structure of circumstantial truth. Still, the legal barrier remains unmoved. Prosecutors warn against confirmation bias. They remind investigators that suspicion, no matter how consistent, is not enough. A jury would need more than patterns and impressions. They would need something solid, something undeniable. The detectives know this. They've always known it. But knowing doesn't make the waiting easier. The cold case unit begins to collaborate more aggressively with forensic specialists, revisiting evidence that has survived the years. Not because it promises answers, but because it represents the last place the truth could still be hiding, preserved by accident rather than memory. Each item is handled with reverence. These are no longer objects. They are witnesses that cannot lie, only fail to speak. The results are frustratingly familiar. Partial matches. Statistical probabilities. Nothing that crosses the threshold from interesting to actionable. Yet even in disappointment, something shifts. The absence of other contributors becomes meaningful. The field of possibility narrows again, closing in on the same center it has circled for decades. Outside the investigation, the world changes faster than the case ever could. New crimes dominate attention. New scandals rewrite headlines. The story of 1987 becomes something people vaguely remember, a reference point rather than an act of concern. But for those closest to it, nothing fades. The family continues to mark time not by years, but by what has not happened. No arrest. No confession. No apology. The suspect's behavior begins to reflect the strain. There are moments of impatience now, flashes of irritation that break through the carefully maintained calm. A complaint about being harassed. A pointed remark about police incompetence. The language is revealing, defensive in ways that feel unnecessary. Detectives take note, aware that pressure does not create guilt, but it can expose it. An unexpected development emerges when an old acquaintance of the victim is contacted for an unrelated inquiry. During the conversation, they mention something small, something that never felt important enough to share before. A memory of the suspect arriving unannounced one evening, tense, distracted, unusually quiet. The timing is wrong for the story that has been told for years. The detail is logged. Another thread added to the web. The case now exists in a strange state of near certainty and total paralysis. Investigators believe they understand what happened, how it happened, and who is responsible. What they cannot do is prove it in a way the law demands. The gap between truth and justice feels impossibly narrow and endlessly wide at the same time. As the 20th anniversary approaches, preparations are made quietly. Statements drafted. Files reviewed. Detectives debate whether another public push could help or hurt. Exposure risks tipping off the suspect, but silence risks losing the case entirely to time. In the end, they choose measured visibility. Enough to remind the public, not enough to reveal strategy. The anniversary passes without resolution. Candles burn. Names are spoken. The community pauses briefly, then moves on again. But the investigation does not. It lingers in offices long after lights are turned off, in conversations that never quite end, in the shared understanding that something fundamental is still unresolved. Late one night, a detective revisits an interview transcript from years earlier, reading it slowly, without expectation. A phrase stands out, one that seemed harmless at the time. It now reads like a tell, a defensive reflex disguised as helpfulness. The detective underlines it, feeling that familiar mix of dread and determination. The cold case is not dormant. It is patient. It waits for the smallest fracture, the quietest mistake, the one moment when control slips and truth surfaces, not in a confession or a dramatic reveal, but in something far more fragile and far more human, the inability to keep pretending forever. There's a point in every long-running investigation when the case stops asking for answers and starts demanding endurance, when the question is no longer who did it, but who will still be standing when the truth finally has nowhere left to hide. By the time the case enters its third decade, the detectives working it understand that they are no longer chasing a suspect. They are outlasting one. The suspect's life has grown smaller, quieter, shaped by the slow erosion of possibility. Friends drift away. Conversations become cautious. Every interaction carries the faint awareness of being watched, even when no one is there. This is not punishment in any legal sense, but it is a consequence, the kind that settles into the bones over time. The suspect complains privately about the injustice of it all, about a life lived under suspicion without charge. The irony is sharp, but unspoken. Inside the department, the cold case unit restructures again. New leadership brings renewed scrutiny and a willingness to challenge assumptions that once felt immovable. The case is reassigned not because it was mishandled, but because fresh eyes can sometimes see what familiarity blurs. Every conclusion is questioned. Every theory tested, as if for the first time. The trusted family friend remains the gravitational center of the narrative, impossible to dislodge, no matter how often they try. Investigators begin building what they call a pressure profile, not for prosecution but for understanding. How does the suspect respond to stress? To attention? To perceived loss of control? Past interviews are compared, not for facts, but for tone. Shifts are charted. Defensive language grows sharper over time. Explanations become longer, more elaborate. Simplicity gives way to overjustification. It is not evidence, but it is movement. A rare moment of optimism arrives through technology that didn't exist when the crime occurred. Genetic genealogy is emerging, quietly revolutionizing cold cases across the country. The idea that family trees could reveal what databases could not feels almost miraculous. Evidence is submitted again, cautiously, aware of the legal and ethical boundaries still being defined. The wait is agonizing. Hope, after decades, is dangerous. When results return, they are incomplete, frustrating, but not meaningless. A distant familial connection surfaces, faint but real. It does not point directly to the suspect, but it narrows the field in a way that feels decisive. Once again, others are excluded. Once again, the suspect remains unexcluded. The pattern is impossible to ignore, even if it cannot yet be spoken aloud in court. The community responds with a mix of renewed interest and weary skepticism. They have heard promises before, breakthroughs that led nowhere. Still, the story spreads, reigniting conversations that never fully ended. People revisit their own memories, asking themselves what they might have missed, what they chose not to see. The case has become a mirror, reflecting not just a crime, but a collective reluctance to question what feels safe. The suspect senses the shift almost immediately. Their demeanor changes. There is urgency now, a subtle acceleration in speech, a defensiveness that no longer bothers to hide. They contact a lawyer more frequently. They begin to decline interviews they once accepted eagerly. The cooperation that once served as a shield now feels like a liability. Detectives adjust their approach. They don't confront. They observe. They wait. They understand that time has always been their most effective tool. People can maintain lies for days, months, even years. Decades are harder. The story begins to fray at the edges, not through contradiction, but through exhaustion. A chance encounter provides an unexpected angle. A retired officer, long removed from the case, mentions a moment that never made it into an official report. A conversation with the suspect shortly after the crime, informal, unrecorded. The suspect had asked an oddly specific question, one that implied knowledge of details not yet public. At the time, it was dismissed as coincidence. Now, it feels radioactive. The information is logged, corroborated as much as possible, and added to the ever-growing mosaic. It is still not enough, but it deepens the outline of a story that investigators believe they finally understand in full. The crime was not born of chaos or impulse. It was born of familiarity, resentment, and an unspoken breaking point that no one else witnessed. The victim's family is updated carefully, honestly. There are no promises, only acknowledgement that the case is active, evolving, and very much alive. They listen with the quiet composure of people who have learned not to react too quickly to hope. Their grief has become something steady, almost structural, woven into daily life. Justice, if it comes, will not heal them, but it will matter. As the suspect ages further, mortality becomes an increasingly urgent concern. Investigators are acutely aware of the ticking clock, of what it would mean to lose the chance to hear the truth spoken aloud. They discuss contingency plans, legacy strategies, ways to preserve what they know even if the law never catches up. The goal shifts subtly from conviction to clarity. Late one evening, after reviewing decades of material, a detective writes a summary not for a report, but for themselves. It is a single narrative, clean, logical, devastating in its simplicity. When finished, they realize something important. The case no longer feels complicated. It feels constrained, like a door held shut by a single, well-placed hand. The cold case has not ended. It has matured. It has shed distractions and false paths. What remains is a stark outline of trust betrayed and silence maintained. Somewhere, within reach but not yet grasped, is the final piece. And when it comes, it will not arrive as a revelation, but as a release, the moment when endurance finally outpaces denial and the truth, long contained, is forced to breathe. By the time the case reaches its fourth decade, the language around it changes, not officially but emotionally, shifting from questions to conclusions that cannot yet be spoken aloud. Inside the cold case unit, there is a quiet consensus, unrecorded and unofficial, that the mystery has narrowed to a single human shape. The problem is no longer identifying that shape. The problem is making it visible to the law. The suspect's world continues to contract. Age has a way of stripping away distractions, leaving only what a person has carried with them all along. Illness appears, first minor, then persistent. Doctor's appointments replace social plans. Energy wanes. The confidence that once filled interview rooms now arrives in shorter bursts, followed by long silences. Detectives notice how fatigue loosens control. Answers wander. Precision slips. The mask still holds, but it requires effort now, and effort leaves traces. Investigators return once more to the earliest hours of the case, not because they expect new facts, but because early lies tend to be the most revealing. They listen again to the first emergency calls, the initial witness statements, the media briefings that shaped public understanding. Something stands out, subtle but unsettling. The suspect's emotional tone in the immediate aftermath does not evolve the way grief typically does. There is shock, yes, but it never deepens, never fractures. It remains fixed, controlled, as if rehearsed too early. A forensic psychologist is brought in quietly, not to diagnose, but to interpret patterns. They review transcripts, audio, behavioral shifts over time. Their assessment is careful, restrained, but unmistakable. The suspect displays classic signs of narrative management, anticipating questions before they are asked, correcting perceived misunderstandings that do not exist, returning repeatedly to the same self-exonerating points. It is not proof of guilt, but it is not neutral either. The cold case unit debates strategy. Another direct confrontation could harden defenses permanently. Silence, on the other hand, might invite mistakes. They choose patience, a slow tightening of presence rather than pressure. Occasional check-ins. Requests for clarification. Reminders that the case is active, remembered, unresolved. The goal is not confession. It is erosion. Meanwhile, the public narrative shifts again. A national true crime series features the case, anonymized but unmistakable to those who know it. Details are revisited. Timelines scrutinized. Amateur analysts point fingers, sometimes wildly, sometimes uncomfortably close to the truth. The suspect watches, listening to strangers say out loud what law enforcement cannot. Their reaction is immediate and unguarded: anger, denial, a visible crack in the carefully maintained exterior. Detectives take note. The suspect reaches out proactively, demanding to know what is being said, insisting on setting the record straight. It is the first time in years they have initiated contact. The move feels impulsive, driven by fear rather than strategy. For investigators, it confirms something they have long suspected. The greatest threat is no longer evidence. It is exposure. Another witness surfaces, drawn forward by the renewed attention. They are older now, burdened by memory and regret. They describe a conversation from decades earlier, a moment they dismissed because it felt inappropriate to question someone they trusted. The suspect had spoken about the crime with an intimacy that felt premature, as if recounting something experienced rather than heard. At the time, it passed unnoticed. Now it lands heavily. The statement is corroborated partially, enough to give it weight. Prosecutors review it with cautious interest. It is still circumstantial, still fragile, but combined with everything else, it begins to resemble a structure rather than a collection of fragments. The question shifts from what happened to, can we responsibly act on what we believe happened? The victim's family is informed again, gently, honestly. They listen without interruption, absorbing details they have lived with for decades. There is no dramatic reaction, no tears, just a quiet nod of understanding. They have long accepted that justice, if it comes, will not be clean or complete. What they want now is acknowledgement, a public truth, a name spoken without hesitation. As the suspect's health declines further, urgency intensifies. Investigators are haunted by the possibility of losing the chance forever. They prepare for scenarios they once refused to consider. Death without confession, closure without conviction. They compile their findings into a comprehensive narrative, designed not just for court, but for history. If the law cannot deliver justice, the record must at least deliver clarity. Late one night, a detective receives a call from a colleague who has been quietly monitoring the suspect's behavior. The suspect has made an unusual request, asking about legal protections related to statements made outside of interrogation. The question is framed casually, but its timing is unmistakable. Something is weighing heavily. Something is shifting. The case, once stalled by lack of movement, now feels unstable, like a structure under stress. The suspect is tired. The investigators are patient. The balance of power, subtle and unspoken, is beginning to tilt. There is no confession yet, no dramatic revelation. But the silence has changed. It no longer feels secure. As dawn approaches, the detective reviews the case summary again, aware that they may be closer to the end than ever before. Not the ending people expect. Not an arrest splashed across headlines. But a moment when the truth is no longer contained by fear or time, when it surfaces because it must. The cold case is no longer frozen. It is thawing, slowly, painfully, revealing what has been buried beneath decades of restraint. And somewhere, behind tired eyes and careful words, the weight of 1987 is finally becoming too heavy to carry alone. There is a subtle moment in long investigations when inevitability replaces uncertainty, when everyone involved senses that the ending has already been written, even if the final sentence has not yet been spoken aloud. The case enters that phase quietly, without announcements or breakthroughs, carried forward by a shared understanding that something is approaching, something irreversible. The suspect feels it first. Long before law enforcement makes a move, long before any legal action is considered, the pressure becomes internal. Sleep fractures. Routine slips. Conversations wander back to the past without invitation. The name of the victim appears more often, spoken as if testing how it feels to say it out loud after all these years. To those around them, it looks like aging. To investigators, it looks like strain. Detectives adjust their rhythm. They don't escalate. They simplify. Requests become shorter. Questions narrower. Each interaction is designed to reduce escape routes, to strip away the excess language the suspect has relied on for decades. There is no confrontation, no accusation. Just silence, carefully placed, allowing the suspect's own words to fill the space. Silence, they know, is far harder to control than speech. The forensic picture, long incomplete, sharpens just enough to matter. A reevaluation of physical evidence, combined with updated behavioral analysis, produces a timeline that feels uncomfortably precise. It doesn't require imagination anymore. It requires acceptance. The pieces align not because they were forced, but because there are no alternatives left that make sense. The crime, once mysterious, now feels disturbingly logical. Prosecutors are briefed again. This time, the tone is different. Less speculation. More narrative. They listen carefully, asking fewer questions than before. When they speak, it is not to promise charges, but to acknowledge reality. The case may never survive a trial, but that does not mean it has no conclusion. Justice, they agree, has more than one form, even if the law recognizes only one. Public interest surges once more as rumors begin to circulate. Not official leaks, but whispers carried by pattern recognition, by the way institutions move when something is changing. Journalists sense it. So do longtime observers. The language in articles shifts from questioning to reflection. The phrase cold case appears alongside words like legacy and truth. The ending is being prepared, whether anyone admits it or not. The suspect reacts defensively to the renewed attention, but the defenses are thinner now. There is anger, yes, but also resignation. They speak of being misunderstood, of a life overshadowed by accusation. What they do not speak of is the victim. The absence is striking. Investigators note it carefully. Silence, once again, says more than denial ever could. A final interview is scheduled, framed as routine, voluntary, informal. The suspect agrees, perhaps believing this is just another cycle, another past that will fade like all the others. The room is smaller this time. Fewer people. No show of force. Just two detectives and decades of unresolved history. The questions are simple, familiar, but the pauses between them stretch longer than before. At one point, the suspect begins to speak, stops, and starts again. The words that follow are not a confession. They are something more ambiguous, more revealing. An admission of proximity, of presence, of moments previously described differently. The statements are careful, legally guarded, but they mark a shift that cannot be undone. Once a story changes the slate, it never changes back. The interview ends without raised voices, without drama. Everyone knows what has just happened, even if nothing can yet be proven. Outside, the world continues as it always has, unaware that something fundamental has moved beneath the surface. For investigators, the case has crossed a line. It will never return to what it was. The victim's family is contacted again, this time not with hope, but with honesty. They are told that while an arrest may never come, the truth has taken shape in a way it never had before. There is grief in the room, but also something else. Relief, fragile and incomplete, but real. To be believed after so long is its own form of justice. The suspect withdraws further from public life. Health declines. Conversations with lawyers increase. There are moments, according to those close to them, when the weight becomes visible, when the past presses in too hard to ignore. They speak of regrets, vaguely, without naming them. They avoid specifics. Avoid names. Avoid nights they cannot forget. As the year turns, investigators finalize a document they never expected to write, a comprehensive factual narrative designed not for prosecution, but for record. It lays out what is known, what is believed, and why. It names no suspect officially, but it leaves little doubt. This is the closest the system may ever come to an answer. The cold case, after decades of waiting, has reached its quiet climax. Not with handcuffs or courtrooms, but with clarity earned through patience and persistence. The truth has not exploded into view. It has surfaced slowly, painfully, like something long submerged finally running out of depth. And as the file is closed one last time, not solved but understood, the question that once haunted everyone begins to loosen its grip. What remains is not closure, but truth without denial, a fragile, hard-won understanding that will endure long after the silence that once protected it has finally begun to fade. When the document is finished, when the last sentence is checked and rechecked for precision, it does not feel like an ending. It feels like an admission. The system has reached the edge of what it can do, and beyond that edge lies a truth everyone can see, but no one can formally seize. The cold case has not been solved in the way headlines promise, but it has been stripped of its uncertainty, and that changes everything. The report moves quietly through internal channels. Supervisors read it slowly. Legal advisors underline phrases. No one argues with its logic. They argue only with its limits. There is agreement that the narrative is sound, that the conclusions are unavoidable. There is also agreement that a courtroom would be merciless. Doubt, however small, would grow there, fed by time, by faded memories, by the absence of a single undeniable piece of physical proof. The decision not to charge is not made lightly. It is made reluctantly, painfully, and unanimously. News of the report leaks, not through documents, but through tone. The way officials speak in interviews. The way questions are answered without being fully answered. Journalists sense the shift immediately. Articles stop asking who might have done it and start examining how it could have gone unresolved for so long. The suspect's name remains officially absent, but unofficially, it is everywhere. Whispers fill the spaces that facts cannot legally occupy. The community reacts in fragments. Some feel vindicated, believing what they suspected for years. Others feel betrayed, angry that certainty can exist without consequence. There are arguments, quiet and loud, about justice and fairness, about whether belief without conviction is enough. The case, once a singular tragedy, becomes a lens through which people examine their faith in institutions, in certainty, in each other. The suspect reads the coverage carefully. Each article, each comment, each omission. The absence of an arrest does not bring relief. It brings exposure. For decades, ambiguity offered protection. Now, clarity, without accusation, leaves nowhere to hide. Friends stop calling. Invitations disappear. Conversations become strained, formal, distant. The world has decided, even if the law has not. Health issues escalate. Hospital visits become more frequent. Time, which once worked in the suspect's favor, now moves with a cruel urgency. There are moments, according to those nearby, when the past intrudes without warning, when memories surface unfiltered, stripped of the careful framing that once kept them manageable. Regret becomes visible, not in words, but in posture, in silence, in the way the suspect avoids mirrors. Investigators remain involved, not actively, but attentively. They understand that the story is not over until it is truly over. They monitor developments, document changes, preserve records. The goal is no longer arrest. It is preservation. Whatever truth exists must survive the people who carry it. The victim's family receives the report in full. They read it privately, slowly, absorbing every detail. There is pain in seeing the story laid out so plainly, but there is also validation. For the first time, their understanding of what happened aligns with the official understanding. They are not being asked to imagine anymore. They are being asked to accept. Public memorials take on new meaning. The victim's name is spoken with less uncertainty, more resolve. The community begins to tell the story differently, not as a mystery, but as a caution. Trust is no longer assumed. It is examined. The lesson of 1987 is no longer just about violence. It is about proximity, about how well we think we know the people closest to us. The suspect's legal counsel advises silence. No interviews. No statements. The strategy is sound, but it cannot stop the internal unraveling. Silence used to be control. Now it is isolation. The weight of decades presses inward, no longer balanced by the confidence of getting away with it. The absence of denial becomes its own kind of admission. A final interaction occurs quietly, away from cameras. An investigator and the suspect cross paths by chance, not in an interview room, but in a public space. There is recognition. A pause. No words are exchanged. None are needed. The understanding passes between them, heavy and unspoken. The moment is brief, but it lingers longer than any interrogation ever did. As the year draws to a close, the department archives the case again, this time with annotations that reflect what has changed. The file is labeled clearly. Unsolved. Cold case. But beneath that, in language meant for those who will read it later, the truth is outlined with care. Not proven, not punished, but known. The story does not end with justice in the traditional sense. It ends with memory, with acknowledgement, with a community that no longer pretends not to know. The cold case has lost its mystery, even if it has not gained a verdict. And in the quiet that follows, as headlines fade and conversations move on, the truth remains, settled but unresolved, a permanent mark left by a crime that refused to disappear and by a silence that, in the end, could not protect anyone, not even the person who relied on it most. What lingers after the noise fades is not relief, but a quieter reckoning, the kind that settles slowly and refuses to be ignored. The case no longer dominates headlines, but it has altered the way people speak about certainty, about safety, about the distance between knowing and proving. The cold case has entered its final phase, not as an investigation, but as a truth that must now live without resolution. Inside the department, the detectives who carried the case the longest feel an unfamiliar emptiness. For years, the unanswered questions gave their work a shape, a direction. Now, with the narrative complete but unfinished, there is nothing left to chase. They review the file one last time, not looking for errors, but for peace of mind. Every decision is examined. Every missed opportunity acknowledged. There is no illusion that the outcome could have been different. Time, they accept, was always the most powerful variable. The suspect's decline accelerates. Illness strips away routine and pretense alike. Days are measured in appointments, medications, moments of clarity followed by confusion. The past intrudes more frequently now, uninvited and unfiltered. Those close to the suspect describe sudden mood shifts, flashes of agitation, murmured fragments of memory that make no sense out of context. Names are spoken without explanation. Years are confused. But still, no full confession emerges. Silence, it seems, has become instinctive. Rumors circulate quietly, carried by those who believe the end is near. Some expect a deathbed confession, a final attempt to control the narrative. Others doubt it will ever come. Confession requires a willingness to surrender the last illusion of innocence, and that surrender may be more frightening than death itself. Investigators prepare for both possibilities, knowing neither can be forced. The victim's family lives with a complicated form of closure. They have answers, but no justice in the way society defines it. Friends ask if knowing helps. The family struggles to explain that truth does not heal, but ignorance wounds differently. To understand what happened is not to be relieved of grief, but to be freed from doubt. That, they decide, is enough. The community adjusts its memory of the case. Stories told to newcomers are more direct now, stripped of speculation. The crime is no longer described as a mystery, but as a betrayal that went unpunished. There is anger in that framing, but also honesty. The town has learned something about itself, about how easily trust can become a blind spot. The suspect withdraws almost entirely from public life. Isolation deepens. Visitors become rare. Conversations shorter. Those who do see them describe a person haunted not by fear of arrest, but by something heavier and less defined. Regret, perhaps. Or the exhaustion of carrying a secret for longer than anyone ever should. An investigator receives an unexpected call late one night. Not a confession, not an admission, just a question from someone close to the suspect, asking what would happen if certain things were said now. The answer is careful, measured, honest. It would change nothing legally. It would change everything personally. The call ends without resolution, but it confirms what investigators already sensed. The truth is close to the surface, pressing upward. As the suspect's condition worsens, conversations around them become guarded. Family members debate what should be said, what should be left unsaid. The past looms large in the room, unnamed but undeniable. There are moments when it feels as though the truth might finally emerge, but it never quite does. Each time, it retreats behind habit and fear. The cold case unit documents everything even now. Dates, statements, changes in behavior. Not because they expect a breakthrough, but because history deserves accuracy. If the ending comes quietly, it must still be recorded with care. The story, after all, does not belong to one person. It belongs to everyone who lived in its shadow. As the final weeks approach, there is no sense of triumph, no anticipation of justice served. Only a quiet acknowledgement that the case has reached the end of its possible arc. The system has done what it can. The rest lies beyond its reach. In the stillness before whatever comes next, the investigators reflect on the strange endurance of the truth. It survived denial, time, and silence. It did not arrive in court. It did not arrive in handcuffs. It arrived slowly, through persistence, memory, and the refusal to let a victim be forgotten. The cold case has not been solved in the way the world prefers, but it has been understood. And in that understanding, imperfect and incomplete, something fundamental has shifted. The silence that once protected the truth has thinned, and even if it never fully breaks, it can no longer pretend to be empty. The end does not arrive with sirens or headlines or a final, undeniable sentence spoken into a recorder. It arrives quietly, the way everything in this case has learned to arrive, without permission and without ceremony. One day, the calls stop. The monitoring ends. The updates become unnecessary. The suspect is gone, carried out of the story by time itself, leaving behind a silence heavier than any confession could have been. There is no announcement from the department, no press conference to mark the moment. Death does not solve a cold case. It only seals it. The file is opened one last time, not to investigate, but to document. Date. Cause. Final status. Uncharged. Unconvicted. Unconfessed. The words sit on the page, stark and unsatisfying, yet unavoidable. This is how the story ends, not with justice delivered, but with possibility extinguished. The community learns the news the way it learns everything now, gradually, through tone rather than facts. Conversations pause. People lower their voices. Some feel relief, others anger, others a hollow neutrality that surprises them. There is no single reaction because there is no single ending. For some, the absence of accountability feels like a second crime. For others, the weight of suspicion finally lifting from the air brings a strange, guilty calm. The victim's family receives the call privately. No one asks how they feel because there is no language for it. Grief does not reset. It simply rearranges itself around new realities. There is no satisfaction in this moment, only a quiet acknowledgement that the waiting is over. They will never hear the truth from the one person who could have spoken it plainly. They will also never have to wonder if that day is still coming. Investigators close the case in the only way left to them, by preserving it. Every report, every interview, every conclusion drawn with care and restraint. They write a final summary that does not accuse, but does not pretend uncertainty either. It speaks in the language of fact, inference, and probability. It leaves space for history to understand what the law could not finalize. The cold case file is archived with intention, flagged for future readers who may wonder why something so clear never ended in a courtroom. The answer is there between the lines. Time, trust, the limits of proof, the cost of waiting too long for certainty that never arrives cleanly. Years later, people will still search the case. They will read articles, listen to narrations, argue in comments about guilt and innocence. Some will insist that without a conviction, nothing can be known. Others will see the pattern and feel the weight of it instantly. The case will live on, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a truth to be reckoned with. The house where it began no longer looks the same. The street has changed. Trees have grown. Families have moved in and out, unaware at first of what once happened there. Eventually, someone always tells them, not as gossip, but as warning. This place remembers. This community learned something here. What remains of the suspect is not a name in a headline, but a lesson written into memory. That proximity is not safety, that familiarity is not innocence, and that some crimes succeed not because they are perfect, but because they are trusted. The cold case never delivers the ending people want. It delivers the ending people get. A truth understood too late for punishment, but too clearly to deny. An answer without a verdict. A conclusion without release. And so the story settles into its final shape, not closed, not solved, but no longer searching. The question that once echoed through decades fades, replaced by something quieter and more enduring, the knowledge of what happened, and the understanding that silence, no matter how long it lasts, is never the same as innocence. In the end, the cold case does not end at all. It becomes part of the landscape, a shadow that reshaped lives, a warning passed from one generation to the next. The voice that tells this story lowers, steadies, and finally falls silent, leaving behind the one thing that survived everything else: the truth. Time moves on in the way it always does after a story like this, indifferently, steadily, without regard for what was left unfinished. New cases arrive. New names fill the blotter. New tragedies demand attention. But the old cold case does not disappear. It recedes, settling into the background like a low, persistent hum that never fully fades, only grows easier to ignore. In police academies, the case is mentioned without drama. Not as a failure, but as a reality. Recruits are told about it in plain language, stripped of emotion. Evidence matters. Timing matters. And trust, once given too freely, can become the strongest shield a suspect will ever have. The lesson is not heroic. It is cautionary. The victim's name remains etched in records, in memories, in quiet conversations that surface when the night grows long. Birthdays still come and go. Anniversaries still sting. The absence has become familiar, but never normal. Grief does not ask for resolution in neat terms. It asks only to be acknowledged, again and again, in the spaces where answers should have been. Sometimes a new tip comes in, even now, a call from someone who heard something years ago, A message sent late at night, vague but urgent. Investigators listen, as they always have. They check. They document. They close the loop. The outcome never changes, but the process remains intact. The case is cold, not forgotten. The suspect's life, once scrutinized from every angle, fades into abstraction. What remains are fragments, choices made, moments misread, silences that carried too much weight. No epitaph can explain them. No timeline can soften them. Whatever truth existed between those walls in 1987 remains sealed there, inaccessible, unmoved by the passing decades. The community carries the story forward in pieces. A sentence overheard. A warning offered quietly. A look exchanged when the name is mentioned. These are not rumors. They are echoes. The kind that linger long after the sound itself has vanished. In the end, there is no final twist waiting in the dark. No revelation hiding just beyond the frame. The cold case stands as it is, a reminder that some stories do not conclude, they endure. They live in memory, in caution, in the understanding that justice is not guaranteed by truth alone. The voice that tells the story does not raise itself anymore. It does not need to. Everything that could be said has already been carried through time. What remains is silence, and within that silence, a truth the world learned too late and will never fully put to rest. There is a moment, years after everything has supposedly ended, when the case resurfaces without warning. Not in a courtroom, not in an arrest, but in a conversation that happens too casually to be planned. Someone mentions the year. Someone else remembers the name. And just like that, the past steps back into the room, uninvited, unchanged. Old investigators still recognize it instantly. The cadence of the facts, the shape of the timeline, the way the story refuses to stay buried. They have seen hundreds of files since, but this one clings. Not because it was loud, but because it was quiet in all the wrong places. Because it asked the kind of questions that never stop asking themselves. The evidence, boxed and preserved, sits in controlled storage, untouched but not irrelevant. Technology has advanced. Methods have evolved. Every few years, someone wonders if now is the moment, if the answer has finally caught up with the question. Tests are rerun. Results return unchanged. Science confirms what time already knew. There is nothing new to extract, only the same truth, staring back with the same restraint. The victim's absence continues to ripple outward, subtle but permanent. Lives took different paths because of it. Decisions were shaped around an empty space. The story became part of how people understood danger, trust, and proximity. It was no longer about one night in 1987. It was about what that night revealed. True crime podcasts revisit the case, their voices hushed, reverent. They lay out the facts, reconstruct the timeline, pause at the same places investigators once did. Listeners feel the pull, the frustration, the certainty that stops just short of proof. The case gains new audiences, new debates, new interpretations. None of them change the ending. The suspect's name is spoken less often now, but when it is, the reaction is immediate. A tightening of posture. A pause before responding. Some still defend. Some no longer bother. Time has thinned the arguments, leaving only the core of what was always there, a story that never quite made sense until it made too much. There are those who believe that justice, delayed long enough, transforms into something else entirely. Not punishment, not closure, but understanding. A shared recognition of what happened, even without a signature at the bottom of a verdict. It is not satisfying, but it is real. The case file bears its final designation in official terms, yet everyone who has ever touched it knows the truth. Cold cases do not freeze. They breathe slowly. They wait. They exist in a state between resolution and oblivion, sustained by memory alone. And memory is persistent. It lives in the way the story is told, never rushed, never softened. It lives in the pauses, in the details that refuse to fade. It lives in the understanding that sometimes the most devastating crimes are not the ones that shock the world, but the ones that quietly reshape it. As the years continue to stack themselves higher, the case remains exactly where it has always been. Not solved, not lost, just there. A permanent reminder that silence can last a lifetime and still never be empty. The voice that carries this story does not seek an ending anymore. It knows there isn't one. It speaks because the story still exists, and because existence alone is enough to demand to be heard. Somewhere between suspicion and certainty, between evidence and belief, the cold case endures, unchanged, unresolved, and impossible to forget. The years continue to add distance, but distance does not dilute what happened. It sharpens it. With every passing decade, the case sheds the noise that once surrounded it: speculation, outrage, hope, and what remains is a core so dense it feels heavier than before. The story is no longer crowded with possibilities. It is defined by absence, by what never came, by what was never said. The town has changed names on storefronts, repainted schools, rebuilt intersections. New families walk the same sidewalks, unaware at first of the invisible lines drawn by memory. Then inevitably someone asks. Someone always does. And the answer arrives carefully, measured, as if spoken too loudly might wake something that has learned to sleep lightly. This is where it happened. This is the year. This is the case that never left. For those who lived through it, the timeline is etched into instinct. They remember where they were when the news broke, how the air felt afterward, how trust became conditional overnight. Parents tightened rules. Doors locked earlier. Familiar faces were re-examined through a lens that never existed before. The crime did not just take a life. It rearranged behavior. Investigators who have long since retired still think about it in unguarded moments. Not as regret, but as weight. The kind that settles into muscle memory. They replay interviews in their minds, hear the cadence of answers that never quite aligned, remember the moments when something felt wrong but could not yet be named. Experience teaches recognition. Time teaches its cost. The case has become a reference point, a shorthand for a particular kind of horror, the kind that does not announce itself. The kind that hides behind routine, behind smiles, behind the comfort of familiarity. It is cited quietly, almost academically, when discussing patterns of trust exploited too well, when explaining why some crimes last longer than others, when warning that proximity is power. Every so often, a journalist tries to write a definitive piece. They gather records, conduct interviews, assemble the facts with care. The article is thorough. The conclusions are cautious. Readers finish it with the same feeling they always do, a certainty that stops just short of relief. The truth is there, hovering, undeniable in shape if not in name. The victim remains at the center of it all, not as a symbol, but as a presence. A life interrupted, not frozen in time, but carried forward by those who remember. Photos age. Voices fade from recordings. But the person remains intact in memory, defined not by the crime, but by the space left behind when they were taken. There is no redemption arc here. No late-breaking revelation waiting to reframe everything. The case has resisted narrative closure with the same stubbornness it has always shown. It exists outside the usual structure of justice stories, refusing to offer a lesson wrapped in resolution. What it offers instead is endurance. The community has learned to live with that endurance, to carry it without constantly touching it, to know it is there, shaping the edges of collective memory. It surfaces in quiet moments, in late conversations, in the way certain years still cause people to pause before speaking. As the voice continues, steady and restrained, it understands something that took decades to become clear. This story was never about a single night, or even a single person. It was about what happens when certainty arrives without permission, when truth becomes obvious only after it is too late to act on it fully. The cold case stands unchanged, not because it lacks answers, but because answers alone were never enough. And so it remains, suspended between what is known and what can be proven, casting a long, unbroken shadow that no amount of time has managed to shorten. At a certain point, the case stops being measured in years and starts being measured in generations. People who were not yet born in 1987 now speak about it with a familiarity that feels unsettling, as if memory itself has outlived those who first carried it. The story has crossed that invisible line where history becomes inheritance, passed down not through records alone, but through tone, hesitation, and the way adults fall silent when the subject surfaces. The file remains intact, preserved with a care that borders on reverence. Not because it is active, but because it is emblematic. It represents every investigation that came close enough to see the truth clearly, yet never close enough to touch it. New detectives study it late at night, not looking for miracles, but for understanding. They learn how easily certainty can form without ever solidifying into proof. They learn how patience can become paralysis. They learn how time, once lost, never returns evidence in better condition. The name of the suspect exists now in a strange state, neither accused nor absolved. It lingers in footnotes, in cautious phrasing, in conversations that avoid direct statements while clearly meaning them. There is no anger left in the way it is spoken. Only resignation. The kind that settles in after all arguments have exhausted themselves. For the family of the victim, life has continued in fragments stitched together by necessity. There were milestones that arrived without celebration, moments that should have been shared but never were. They learned to carry two timelines at once, the one the world sees and the one that diverged sharply on a single night. Neither replaced the other. Both remain. Occasionally, someone asks the question out loud. Why didn't it end differently? Why wasn't it stopped sooner? The answers are always incomplete. Because trust delayed suspicion. Because certainty arrived before proof. Because justice demands a standard that truth alone cannot always meet. These explanations do not comfort, but they do explain. The cold case has become a marker in the collective consciousness, a reminder etched into professional caution and personal instinct. It altered how interviews are conducted, how early assumptions are challenged, how closely familiarity is examined. Its influence is subtle but permanent, woven into practices shaped by lessons learned too late. The world has moved forward technologically, socially, culturally. Yet the core of the case remains immune to progress. No new tool has changed its outcome. No revelation has emerged to rewrite its ending. It stands as evidence of a limitation that no advancement has overcome, the inability to reach back through time and correct what was missed. As the story continues to be told, the voice does not dramatize. It does not need to. The power lies in restraint, in the accumulation of facts that point firmly in one direction without ever crossing the line into finality. It respects the boundary between knowing and proving, even as it acknowledges how thin that boundary can be. In the quiet after the narration, what lingers is not suspense, but weight. The understanding that some cases do not demand resolution to leave an impact. They demand remembrance. They demand honesty about uncertainty. They demand acceptance of outcomes that feel fundamentally unfinished. The cold case remains, not as a question waiting to be answered, but as a reality that shaped lives and systems alike. It stands as it always has, unresolved, undeniable, and deeply embedded in the fabric of those who remember. And in that persistence, it finds its final form. Not closure, not justice, but permanence. Eventually, the case stops asking to be solved and starts asking to be understood. Not in the language of verdicts or statutes, but in the quieter vocabulary of consequence. What it changed, what it taught, what it took without ever returning. The answer to those questions is everywhere, scattered across years that learned how to live with an open ending. In the department, the file is no longer pulled for hope. It's pulled for orientation. A reminder of how close proximity can blur judgment, how certainty can masquerade as comfort, how silence can be mistaken for stability. The margins of the reports carry the fingerprints of an era, procedures that feel dated now, instincts that were still forming then. None of it reads like incompetence. It reads like humanity under pressure, doing its best with time that refused to wait. The town remembers in small ways. A streetlight replaced where one once flickered. A school policy rewritten after a generation grew up too fast. Parents still tell their children to trust their instincts, but verify their assumptions. It's not fear that lingers, it's vigilance. A calibration that never fully resets. Every anniversary arrives without ceremony. No official statement. No renewed plea. Just a quiet awareness that today marks another year added to the stack. Those who notice don't announce it. They carry it privately, like a date that doesn't belong on a calendar anymore, but still finds a way to be felt. The victim's story resists simplification. It is not reduced to a headline or a lesson plan. It lives in specifics, the ordinary details that make loss unbearable because they are so familiar. The laugh someone remembers, the habit no one else shared, the future that never learned how to be real. These are not evidentiary, but they are true. The suspect, absent now in every sense, remains present in effect. Not as a villain frozen in myth, but as a caution carved into memory. A reminder that the most dangerous assumptions are often the most comforting ones. That harm doesn't always arrive from the shadows. Sometimes it walks in through doors that were already open. There are no appeals left to make. No doors to knock on. The legal system has finished speaking, even if it never said what people wanted to hear. What remains is the long echo of a case that taught patience without reward and certainty without consequence. The voice telling this story slows, not to linger, but to let the weight settle where it belongs. There is no need to sharpen the edges anymore. Time has done that on its own. The story stands firm, supported by facts that never wavered, by conclusions that never crossed the final threshold. Cold cases are often described as frozen, but this one was never still. It moved through decades, reshaping methods, expectations, and trust. It influenced how questions were asked and how quickly answers were challenged. It left a mark that cannot be traced to a single outcome, only to a lasting change. As the years stretch forward, fewer people will remember the night itself. More will remember the lesson. That memory, distilled and persistent, becomes the true legacy of the case. Not the absence of a conviction, but the presence of awareness. And so the story continues in the only way left to it. Not forward, not backward, but outward. Into systems improved, instincts sharpened, and silences recognized for what they are. The cold case remains where it has always been, between knowing and proving, still unresolved, still undeniable, and still shaping everything that came after.